This is Cult Connections presents Cult Confessions. Every episode, your host Ian, that's me, is joined by a new guest to discuss a classic film. The only thing is, Ian is only now getting round to watching them, from the scariest horrors to hilarious comedies and everything in between. So come and enjoy Ian's Cult Confessions. Hi, it's the Ian here, and welcome to the first of my new bonus the episodes, Cult the Confessions, where I must admit I finally get round to watching the films I really should have watched a long time ago. They joining me there today. I have the Dirk. How are you, Dirk?
Oh, very good. Thank you for having me.
No, you're very welcome. We are going to start with an absolute the classic here, and I'm almost a bit the sort of ashamed not to have seen it until just last week when I finally got around to it. We're going to talk about 1980s The Shining.
Yes.
So believe it or not, I have never watched this film all the way through, to be fair, until the just last week. For you, Dirk, how sort of often, or what's your first sort of memories of watching it?
So I had the rare experience of growing up in my dad's family video store. And so The Shining was one of those boxes that, I mean, it didn't have artwork that really grabbed me, like say something like Death Stalker or something where you're just like, what is this guy with the sword fighting this giant beast, which is not in the movie for anybody listening. The Shining was just there. And like you said, you're talking about a film that is like in one of like the top 3 directors of all time. It's one of the, when people say horror films, a person that doesn't even watch horror can name The Shining, Poltergeist, and The Exorcist. Like, it's just one of those films. So it's kind of always lived since its release in the zeitgeist of pop culture. And like you said previously, it's been aped and homaged and everything from The Simpsons and stuff. So I, growing up, saw it in fragments, like you said, in images. But it wasn't until in our town, the film was playing when I was a teenager in a theater. And then I just told myself, like, I know enough by this point about cinema that this is a rare opportunity to see something in the grand scale it was intended. And so that was the time that I sat down and watched The Shining.
Yeah. I think for me, so 1980 when it came out, I would have been 6 or 7, obviously far too young to see it then.
Yeah, a little bit.
However, even if even thinking it's not one that, say, I would have picked out from the video, store, or I'd probably seen bits on their sort of TV when it was sort of shown, but I'd never actually watched it all of the way through. Probably in my sort of teenage years, there was other things I was, getting up to, so that just never happened. And then for some reason, it sort of passed me by. And when I'm sitting thinking about it, and I'm like, the sort of Kubrick made it. Now I've watched, 2001 and
Yeah.
Clockwork Orange, Spartacus, the Lolita. I've even watched Barry Lyndon more than once.
There you go. You're one of the few.
But I have never watched The Shining. It's like,
yeah,
what am I sort of doing? It's just so strange. But
well, there is another piece to my history with The Shining, and that is that the exterior shots of the Overlook Hotel are actually Timberline Lodge, which is here in Oregon. So growing up as an Oregonian, there's not a ton of things that we have to claim. There was a game in the 80s called the Oregon Trail, where everyone's livestock got dysentery. It's very depressing. And then we had the fact that Timberline Lodge is in The Shining. And so everyone knows this here, and it becomes a point of conversation. And my wife, even her first job was the first espresso cart on the mountain, which was at there, so Mount
Right.
Hood. So yeah.
Wow. Yeah. Wow. Brilliant. Wow. That's just, yeah, that's really, really good. I think when we talk about it, it's sort of culturally, or one of the factors maybe that I never got around to it is that it's referenced in so many other sort of places. So, like you say, the sort of Simpsons, and
Hmm.
lots of other horror films as well will pay their own sort of homage, or even I'm thinking of the sort of Ready Player One, where that
Oh yeah.
yeah, where that actually plays a huge part in that film, uh,
Yeah.
and really, really well. And actually, when I was watching Ready Player One, I didn't feel like I'd missed out, because I knew all of those bits. I knew what the room number was, and
Yeah.
all those sort of visual their sort of elements, but without actually sitting and watching where it's sort of taken from, which is so strange. But it is absolutely everywhere, and has been spoofed, and
Hmm.
sampled, and music and all kinds of things. So
Yeah, and that set in Ready Player One was actually built. They didn't green screen that part, and I guess Spielberg was just giddy to be standing on, in The Shining, because it's just like it's such a thing, and I just love that they went through the details of like actually building that, for him. I think that's fantastic.
I think, well, actually, I think that's one of the bits about, because I must admit, I watched The Shining last week, and I was at the end of it. It was, well, actually, at the start of it, but more so by the end, I was like, why have I never watched this? Why has it taken me so long to watch this film? Um, and purely thinking from a, a the sort of technical aspect, how
Oh
how,
yeah.
how sort of brilliant that it is, visually, and sort of so on. Um, so yeah, so funnily enough, if if Ready Player One looks like The Shining so much, then that's sort of testament to the power and of the work that actual sort of filmmakers put into
Yeah.
to their work, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think it's a combination of things, and it makes sense that like it didn't leap out at us at a younger age, because I feel like it's very much. I mean, Kubrick's films feel, I don't know if you want to say like educational, but it feels like it's for an adult. It's coming from an adult's very critical mind,
Uh-huh.
and Kubrick's eye, and you couple that with John Alcott, the cinematographer, and the fact that he brought on Garrett Brown, the inventor of the Steadicam, to operate the Steadicam. I mean,
Mm.
the fluidity of the shots and the just the oh, what's it called? The way that everything is so perfectly centered in the frame. I mean, you talk about a film where you watch it once and you can draw up in your head images of it like they're photographs. I mean, it's
Mhm.
just it's some of it's drilled into our brains from being referenced so many times and we've seen it so much, but it's just like it's such an iconic film, and just the pacing of it, the structure of it, what it's about, what it's not about. It's such a interesting thing. So I was like so excited when you asked me to talk about it, because nothing more needs to really be said about The Shining, except for I feel like our personal experiences with it, because that's what differs for everybody. When you press play on it was last week, and the fact that you even did that is fantastic, and that you were like, I'm gonna fill this spot in my mind,
Mhm.
and when also you choose to show that to somebody else, is another great thing, because it's another invitation to like visit this wonderful classic thing that we've all seen so much of. So maybe we don't have that impulse to like watch The Shining.
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah. I think after, I mean, like I said, that even the first two sort of minutes, obviously we get the opening, the sort of shots of the car driving through
Hmm.
the sort of valleys, and the sort of mountains, and the fantastic their landscape there. Um,
Yeah.
which you see in so many films, but like you say, it's framed in such a way. Now, I was sitting, watching it on my 50-inch TV, which is a reasonable sized screen.
Certainly,
You
yeah.
but and even with that, I was like, wow, this is, this, you know, you can just see from that that opening why everybody loves it, like why it's loved by sort of critics who wouldn't really like a film like this,
Yeah.
would maybe sort of scorn it, or just general sort of film sort of lovers, that it's just so expertly sort of crafted.
Yes.
But just from those first 2-3 minutes, I was like, yeah, I can see why now. It's just,
Yeah.
yeah, perfect. They're sort of opening.
Well, you mentioned that opening, and it's such a it's subtle, but it's also iconic in a way that it left such a imprint that when Blade Runner was being shot 2 years later, he remembered that Kubrick had probably some extra footage from these shots, and it's
Yeah,
used in the film when Decker's driving his car. Like,
yeah.
that's actual footage that Kubrick had shot for The Shining, which is
Yeah.
amazing.
I think again, I think two sort of film the makers there who really no disrespect to other film sort of makers, but ones who
Sure.
really do go sort of, they're above and sort of beyond for the craft, and actually looking at at, at their films as the best that they can make it. They're sort of visually, but yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Funnily enough, that was one of my favourite sort of points. Is that's probably the footage from The Shining that I know the best. There,
Oh,
because
yeah.
I have actually watched sort of Blade Runner so many times. So obviously, it's about their family, and they go to this isolated, their sort of hotel there to look after it for the winter, where the father is influenced in many different ways to turn to their sort of violence and go quite they're psychotic,
Yeah.
and their son has some sort of psychic their sort of ability, which is what The Shining sort of part comes from, isn't it? That's where he's got the Shining,
Yes.
so he's able to see things, and they sort of communicate with sort of others. For me, not being they're familiar with the book either, so I was quite sort of glad of that, and and actually not prior to sort of watching it, they sort of deliberately didn't really read anything either, so
Mm.
just so I could sort of look back afterwards, and I was kind of glad that I didn't, because I do know that Stephen King doesn't really like this film, so
Correct. He hates it. Yes. Notoriously so. He did not like the changes that Kubrick made. But the thing about that I think is very interesting is, I mean, the lore is that Kubrick had done Barry Lyndon and was looking for something that would hopefully grab the public, because Barry Lyndon did not. And so he was brought a bunch of Stephen King books. And there's two different versions of the story. One version, he's reading a couple pages and throwing the book against the wall, reading a couple pages, throwing the book against the wall. But there's also another story that right prior to The Shining being released as a book, he was sent the manuscript and he read that, and then agreed to the studio, yeah, I'll make this movie. And then that's when he and Diane Johnson started their drafts. So it depends on which stories you really follow on how it started with Kubrick.
yeah.
But then he instantly started cherry picking what he wanted because he didn't want to make a horror picture. He thought that, if you can believe it, that gore and blood was like gratuitous and not something he wanted to shoot, despite some of the things you see in this film. So I think the changes that he made instantly was what King didn't like, but I think that's also the strengths of the film. One of the big ones is that the book, spoiler alert for people wanting to read the book, ends with the hotel burning down. It's a very Stephen King ending, if you will. But cinema wise, seeing that would have been pretty boring. It would have been the same thing we would see in any other movie. And instead, creating the whole maze situation, which in the book is just moving animal topiary, just like hedges shaped like animals. And so Kubrick made this maze and came up with the whole idea that Jack freezes in it. And then we're left with these iconic images as opposed to just another exploding thing, which in 1980 we see a lot in movies. So it's a very wise decision. And have you watched Dr. Sleep yet?
Well, funnily enough, this afternoon I started. So I watched half an hour and then I was like, oh no, I'm actually going to stop because I wanted to do this and not be influenced by the Dr. Sleep.
Sure.
So, however, the first half hour, which I have watched, I must admit, I really enjoyed.
It's phenomenal. So, it's phenomenal. And I won't spoil it for you, but I will say that there is so much detail put into Dr. Sleep that is directly from The Shining. And what they do is stitch together Kubrick, which King never liked that film, with the original source material in a way that made Stephen King happy, did a great job paying tribute to the book, and also lives within the world that Kubrick created for the film. So it's a masterclass film. It's something that I recommend the director's cut, which is like almost 4 hours long. But it is just, it's just unbelievable. And there's shots that you've already seen in the film that are directly lifted from The Shining, like where Jack Nicholson is meeting the guy to go to and that the straight shot is exactly the same frame with Ewan McGregor. It's really great, which I know we're not talking about right now, but it's hard for me to ever separate those two films now that I've seen them,
I think what that's sort of fascinating because there's a way about the way that sort of Kubrick shoots his scenes that are so artful, but like you said, so well sort of framed that other filmmakers can probably lift that quite sort of effortlessly, like he's actually laid it all out for you and say, look, this is how it looks.
He loves symmetry too. There's so much symmetry in the film. That's what I was the word I was looking for earlier. I mean, just the Grady twins in the hallway. And it's like, even if things aren't directly, because in this, there's a lot of just slightly off of being symmetrical, just enough to create a little unease for us, especially those of us with OCD, where we're just like, okay. But if you watch there on YouTube, there's part of a documentary that Vivian Kubrick shot, his daughter. And it's I believe it's the only behind the scenes footage that exists of the filming of The Shining. And in it, you get a great notion of the fact that they were tweaking things right up to the last second with this film. So there's a part where Jack Nicholson just stopped looking at scripts and would just read what they gave him on the day. And there's also a part where we all know where Jack is talking to Shelley Duvall's character through the cooler when he's in the refrigerator, and there's a part where you see Kubrick looking at Jack from the side and then realizing like, wait, I think I'm gonna lay on the ground. And then he lays on the ground, and we get that great shot that you see in the film where he's like above with his hands on the door and his hair's hanging down. And it was really the same thing. They had the dolly operator and everything shooting Shelley on the other side, and then Kubrick laying below Jack on the other side of the door. It's really amazing to see, because you just think like, now we have people like the director for Midsommar and stuff where they just meticulously storyboard the entire thing. And I feel like you can feel the rigidity when you watch the film, that the director's like, nope, this is it, this is my way, and this is it. And Kubrick very much gets his way, but in a way that feels flexible almost. And I
Mhm.
think that that has like a life that we feel in the movie.
Yeah, I think probably, for sort of Kubrick to be able to sort of do that comes down to actually how great the sets are in it.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I think what we have to note is that the only real outside shot is, like you says, is actually at the start of the hotel, which is
Mm-hmm.
fairly sort of brief. You don't see it all that often. And everything else is actually shot in their sort of studio, but you feel like you're absolutely in a real building.
Yeah.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Well, and in the maze too. I mean, it looks like a giant and giant hedge maze. I mean, the scale of what he's doing in this film is amazing
Yeah.
too. When the crane pulls through um, the ballroom, and you see this in the little Vivian's making of thing. I mean, it's really, because it's 1980. It's like 200 extras in tuxedos in
Yeah.
this room, and there some are dancing, some are conversing. Jack Nicholson's walking through the scene. They shot it like somewhere around 60 times or something to get this right. And you can see the ceiling, you can see all the people. And in the hedge maze, it's like 20 feet tall. It's excessively tall, the hedge
Yeah.
maze, but it gives you this like trapped feeling and this stretched out like image of symmetry in the film. It's just,
Yeah.
it's really, it's like you said, it's just so thoughtfully crafted.
Yeah. I mean, even back then, you would, or other filmmakers would have done, the maze with mats, their sort
Right.
of paintings, or these days, if you were doing that sort of ballroom scene, you would only have a small sort of section, and the rest would be,
Yep. CG. Yeah.
CGI, yeah. Which wouldn't give you any sort of flexibility at all to actually change it up. You would be fairly much stuck with what like you said, what you'd they sort of storyboarded. But I think just the craft in
Mm-hmm.
the film, like you say, it feels like you're in a real building. It feels,
Mm-hmm.
like the famous shots of the Danny, isn't it, going riding his
Yeah.
bike through the corridors. Now that's almost
Yeah.
like an endless shot, but that's a studio. That's not a real building he's going through. It's just, yeah, it's quite sort of staggering, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really impressive. I think some of those shots were actually in a hotel. So some of it is, I think, a set, and then some of it is because in the making of, I believe there's a lot of shots in the hotel. I know it was shot for like 230 days. So I think that there's like multiple locations, but I'm not 100% sure on what is what, except for like the maze. And I know they built the facade in the studio. So
Yeah,
there's like the part where she climbs out the window in the snow.
yeah,
That's in a studio
yeah.
as well.
That's a set. Yeah,
Yeah, but
yeah,
it's pretty amazing. And I don't know how they did some of the shots, like the one I referenced in the grand ballroom, because they dolly through a wall. And I'm like, well, that has to be a set, right? Because they
yeah.
can't. I mean, nowadays everything's just so different and just done in a green screen. And you see these things with the field of depth is so huge and massive, and the scope of it is just so staggering. Like it's really it's an amazing thing.
Yeah, just so well made, so sort of artful, and it feels like a piece of art. Actually, it feels like you could freeze a frame and actually stick it up on your wall and just
Yeah.
stare at it for hours. Funnily enough, which is
Yeah.
yeah. I think to go
I
back, just for me, you were talked about the links to the book and sort of Doctor Sleep and how that sort of
Yeah.
carries it on. I think one of the things that for me, not being they're familiar with those aspects of it, but something that is maybe just for me is how sort of comfortable I felt at the end by how actually open ended that it was. So
Absolutely.
yeah, and I'm I mean, I do know there's there's lots of theories about what the film means, and so on. I know that people have analyzed it to
A
sort of
lot.
death, basically, at ridiculous sort of levels.
Oh yeah. Have
Um,
you watched Room 237? Did you watch that?
I have heard about that. Someone actually warned me off it because it was just because the
It's
people are a bit.
it's worth watching, but I mean, it's I enjoy that kind of like play space, like the what if this means this, but it's like it's so not possible, unfortunately, because in the book the room is 217, it's not room 237, and like
Okay.
in the movie they say it's 237 because the moon is 238,000 miles away from the earth, and Kubrick was part of faking the moon landing is like a preference,
Yeah.
is like part of what the and that's why the Danny has a rocket ship on his sweater. But when you get down to the people that made the film, the sweater was made because Kubrick wanted something handmade. So one of the people on the set had knit that sweater. That's why it's in the film. And the room situation, the reason it's not 217 as it was in the book is because Timberline Lodge, because they were using the facade of it here in Oregon, they requested that they not use that room so that people would want to still stay in that room in
Still
their
staying
lodge.
there, yeah.
And so the studio changed it. And then the irony there is that because the book says 217 and because the movie shows Timberline Lodge, it's the most requested room in the lodge.
Yeah.
Everyone wants to stay in 217. So it's interesting in that way. One thing I wanted to say about also Kubrick and King is that there is one part that could be a real gem, and that is that in the book, in the novel, Jack Torrance drives a red Beetle, and in Kubrick's adaptation, Jack drives the yellow Beetle, and along the roadside we see an upturned red Beetle. And
Oh.
so a lot of people think that this was Kubrick sick with King's feedback on what he was doing, saying, "Well, this is my movie. This is where your like interaction with the story ends."
Mhm.
And so a lot of people speculate that that was a final sort of middle finger to Stephen King, which is
Okay.
interesting.
Right. Okay. I wonder that. Now I don't know the book. I don't even know if I'm going to read the book, to be honest. But
Sure, I
um,
don't read a lot.
but I'm just thinking because obviously, so at the start of the film, and Jack's character's being told about the old caretaker
Hmm.
who went mad and murdered his family.
Yeah.
Um, and then so that's there's sort of Grady, who then sort of turns up in the ballroom sequence
Yes.
as a sort of waiter, as their sort of maitre d' type,
Yeah.
their sort of character. Um, but then at the end of the film, obviously we see there's sort of Nicholson in the photo.
Hmm.
Um, so 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 people speculate that Nicholson, so that the sort of Torrance and sort of Grady characters are the same,
Hmm.
um, or the supernatural presence is always there. No, I don't know, and
Sure.
I'm quite happy to leave it as it is. But you know, does an overturned red sort of beetle point to the fact that there's some odd sort of
Yeah,
loop
like
going
a
on, or
time loop, right? That's
yeah,
another
yeah,
theory that people have that I really like.
yeah.
And I love, like, I mean, I'm a fan of David Lynch films. I'm a fan of like open films because I love the conversation that follows. I
Mhm.
enjoy that play space. I don't need a neat, tidy bow, but in talking about the end of the film, I think it's also interesting to mention that there was two things that were deleted from the film. One of them was something that involved a scrapbook. And I'm not sure exactly what part the scrapbook played in the film, but it's the only surviving piece of these two things because Kubrick had everything else incinerated so that nobody could ever recut his film. Um, but the film critic Tim Dirk said that there was a 2-minute explanatory epilogue that was cut short from the film's premiere. It was a hospital scene at the end of the film where Wendy is talking to the hotel manager, and she is told that searchers were unable to find her husband's body. And then it would end with the photo of Jack in the ballroom, which is a very different ending. It shows that Wendy and Danny are okay, but it also provides the question of, was he ever there? What was he a ghost? Was the upturned car in the beginning his car and he's haunting the family? I mean, it's like you don't know. But without that ending, it's totally different. I love it way better because I love having the confusion of him frozen with that grimacing look on his face, and then the photograph. It's very, very, very fascinating.
Yeah, I must admit it's and funnily enough, obviously it's the photograph was dated the sort of July the 4th, wasn't it, 1921 or 1901 or something like that. Sure. So I'd seen a few sort of tweets with the photograph actually just over the past week. To celebrate it. So it did get me thinking. But funnily enough, we were talking about the sort of Blade Runner earlier, and that's another film that I like in its open, the sort of endedness, and that you can really put any kind of spin on, is sort of Deckard a sort of replicant or not. I know what my thoughts are, and I'm quite happy to stick with that, but I do love how other people have all of their own sort of different sort of spins on it, and I suppose classic films like that, they do that. They get us sort of thinking, and I must admit, having watched The Shining now, I've been thinking about it a lot, and that's actually power to a great film, is that you either you think about it and you almost sort of put yourself in that situation,
right?
So real sort of testament to the power of it.
Yeah, and another aspect to this film that I think is very fascinating, and I did an episode on my podcast with two guys who are in recovery, is that Stephen King wrote The Shining when he was basically a blackout drunk. He was super, super in the phase of alcoholism in his life. And the character very much is Stephen King as an alcoholic spiraling, and what he's losing his family. And that's very much the character that Jack Nicholson plays in The Shining. And when you watch Dr. Sleep 40 years later, this is a book that was written by a man who's very sober and had recovery for many years. And it's very much written from that place of what the damage was from these awful actions of being an alcoholic. So it's really interesting in that aspect. And there is some just scenes in Dr. Sleep that are directly stitched into The Shining that give me goosebumps. And you realize like there's a massive depth to The Shining, that underneath the ghosts, the strange rooms, the guy in the beaver suit or whatever, there are some real human pieces at play underneath this kind of like a cold film. It's very, very interesting too.
And I suppose again, I think we've spoke about obviously the technical aspects and the fantastic sort of visuals and the sets, and the story itself and how sort of strong and sort of powerful that is. I suppose one of the things that almost makes it seem the effortless in a way is actually getting this relatively small their sort of cast who are fairly much absolutely spot on in every role. It's so well
solid,
done.
Solid. I mean, Scatman Carruthers as Dick Holloway is so fun, and when you like see him with Danny, he's like the father figure Danny deserves. And then when you see him in his room, like on his bed with the cool like painting behind him and everything, you're like, whoa, this guy's like super smooth. Like I didn't know, what an interesting side to learn about this guy. And then Shelley Duvall, she's amazing.
Yeah.
Just such a stark, wonderful presence. And sadly, I think she was very mistreated during the filming of this because Kubrick catered to Jack Nicholson the whole time and then kind of negated attention towards her, trying to, I guess, accentuate the rift between Jack and Shelley. But I think that that already existed, I think, just based on herself and her unfortunate battles with mental health. I guess she had clumps of hair falling out at the time of filming this from the stress. And it's no secret that the shot where she's waving the baseball bat at Jack Nicholson as he stalks her up the stairs was shot over 120 times. I mean, that's just an excessive amount of time for anyone to be in emotional duress. So, you know, it's pretty crazy. But, you know, and also Danny quit acting after this. This was his last credit. So, you know, it's the last time you see Danny Lloyd. He's now a teacher. So that's great. But yeah, that it's a phenomenal small tight cast that really gets put through the paces in The Shining.
Yeah, I did. I must admit, I did love Philip their Stone as their sort of Grady. Just
oh yeah,
just again, I think as a their as a their sort of British person, we always love a good sort of British their sort of character actor. But you know, in the scene where he's talking about how the Jack has to they sort of correct his family, it was just so I think so sort of chilling, probably in the way that their sort of domestic their sort of abusers are, you know, and that they don't actually care about their sort of consequences, or what they do is that they think it is sort of right. So he's so matter of fact and almost sort of casual about it when he's speaking at that. I must admit that actually probably chilled me there the most from the film.
Oh, yeah, well, get ready for mega chills because it's all back in Dr. Sleep. It's the role reversals, but the depth of it. I mean, I'm serious. I have goosebumps right now thinking about it because it's like what they're talking about in that scene is mirrored again in the next film, but it's also talking about it from the standpoint of, because Ewan McGregor plays Danny grown up, who has also done the same thing his dad did. He struggled with alcoholism and now is in this place where it's like the conversation he has with, I won't spoil who Grady is in the Dr. Sleep, but I mean, it is deep and it is heady, and there's that glass on the table, just a counter, just like in The Shining. And it's like every little detail that we love from The Shining is like, pardon the pun, but shining in this sequel. And it's just like, man, I am going to probably rewatch it tonight. I probably will. Because unlike The Shining, which we've been steeped in for so long and can just recall, like, oh yeah, here's Johnny and all of this. Dr. Sleep is like a new experience, but it gives you that same hit in your brain, you know, where you're like, oh, that's the goods. Yeah.
Good. Oh, well, yeah. I'm, they're really looking forward to it then. Just, I'll probably be very tired afterwards. My brain will probably just, start to melt a bit after.
Right. Yeah, no, that's a good point. And since I mentioned the Here's Johnny, an interesting fact about that is that was an ad lib. That wasn't in the script. It just came out of Jack in the scene, and everyone was just like, "Oh, that's hilarious. We got to put that in the movie." It doesn't read funny, I think, when you watch it, but it's
this is
a gem.
But now again, for a British person, now this is a reference that we or I think a lot of people don't really get or don't really understand what's underneath it. So
that's so funny.
So everybody knows, that scene. Everybody knows the image of the Jack looking through the broken their door and saying the line. And and for me, I'd never thought about it either. It's just like, oh, that is the iconic line of Jack, the sort of Nicholson,
Yeah.
and for me, for years actually thinking, oh, his character's name is
Right.
must be the Johnny, because the Johnny Carson is not. It's not a thing over here, or as in
Right.
his like
Should
show
it have been
wasn't.
Benny Hill, or who would it have been?
It would have been Michael, sort of Parkinson. That was the big sort of chat
Okay.
show host. So, so
Wow.
something like that. Yeah, but
Should have been
so,
Here's Michael then.
yeah, something like that. Yeah, but so like we know who the Johnny the Carson is, but his show was never broadcast over here.
Ah,
So
it's fascinating.
so the catchphrase wouldn't make sense.
Right.
But 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 we love that scene because Jack just acts and looks sort of
Right.
crazy in it. So
Yeah.
I'm sure lots of British listeners are going, no, I always knew that, but I'm not really certain if actually
Yeah,
that
it's one
many
of
of us would have done.
yeah, it's one of the great things about getting to speak to you is that we like forget there's other points of view from pointed at films other than where we live. It's like I always thought it was weird in video stores that we had a foreign film section that was everywhere but the United States.
Yeah,
And it's
right.
like one aisle, and I was like, it seems kind of like diminutive to the rest of the world that we just call it a foreign film. And now they've expanded, and it would be films from Scotland, films from the UK, I mean, Japan and Italy and stuff. But it was just like you forget that there's the jokes are going to be different in different places. And I found myself really loving what was referred to as like just British humor here, very, very much as a kid. The absurdity of like Monty Python and stuff like that was very much like that was my jam.
Yeah.
But I didn't always get the references for the exact same reason that you're talking about. But I never thought about that with The Shining, so thank you for that.
Yeah. Funny what you should say. I mean, actually thinking about films now, and then we talk about the sort of technical aspects. So one of the things about sort of animated their sort of comedies is that they change the voice actors for
Right.
so some they're sort of British versions of say some Pixar or other sort of films like that. They'll actually change up some of the minor voices.
Really?
Yeah, yeah. So you've got sort of better known sort of British ones. Yeah.
Yeah, I know that some of that there was I don't know what the films are, if it's, I know it's not Pitch Perfect, but there was some big excuse me, series of films that Zac Efron was in. And I know that he went to, I think it was Spain or something, and it was like for the fifth one or something, and he heard what voice he was given in the Spanish films, and it was like a super high-pitched voice, and he was like, that's what I've sounded like for 5 movies. And I think that's endlessly hilarious.
It's really funny. I can't actually remember where it was, but it was someone who was I think it was someone who lived in their sort of Germany, and they were talking about the Bond films, and the voice actor who used to dub Sean, their sort of Connery, also did on Her Majesty's Secret Service. So that George the Lazenby had the same voice.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it's
that's hilarious.
Yeah, that's such an odd one, isn't it?
Yeah.
But
that was George's only Bond film, I think, too.
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, so very, very sort of different there. But funnily enough, talking about the sort of cultural parts of it, one of the bits that I enjoyed from the storeroom bit. So the family's getting shown around, and there's a storeroom, and there's all the food in it, there's all the boxes. And it was this well, I hope this is right, because I hope hope when you look at all of the boxes of their foods
Oh yeah.
that the labels are actually, sort of real ones, and they're sort of recognizable. And so it would
Yes,
make sense to have them there.
it does. The I forget what the product is that has the Native American on it. I forget the name of it. I wasn't familiar with that product.
Uh-huh.
Um, but there is a lot of speculation that the reason that that's there, excuse me, and maybe you've heard this, is that the the hotel was built on a Native American burial ground,
Uh-huh.
and the reason that the blood elevator scene happens is because the men building that elevator were essentially driving a stake through the heart of this burial ground to build the shaft for the elevator, and all the
Right.
blood is that from the Native
Uh-huh.
Americans. I have no idea. I never thought about that a moment in my life, but there is a lot of think pieces online that focus on that aspect of the
Right,
story.
okay. Right. Well, I don't know about that. Maybe someone who's actually listening does know the
Yeah.
brands, I think. But what stuck out for me was for the attention to sort of detail. So being old enough to remember 19 the sort of 80, and some of the labels are, so even for similar their sort of products. So I'm thinking their sort of Kraft
Hmm.
or sort of Heinz, is that the logos are slightly different. So
Mm.
the American logo would be slightly different to the one that we
Oh,
would have.
sure.
And but I think all of the logos are actually, right for where the film's, set. So that's how it
Yeah.
really would look like. Um, and that I really like. I just love the thought that someone in the uh, their sort of production actually had to, source and bring all this stuff over there to England to make sure that the storeroom looked like it's, thousands of miles away.
Yes. Yeah, I love that. I also love in other films from anywhere else to see, like you said, the logo will be different for like Heinz or something, but
Yeah,
also the flavors of things are different. Like you have different chip flavors in, England than we do here,
yeah,
but it's the same company. And like Japan has crazy like Doritos and Kit Kats and all kinds
yeah,
of stuff
Kit
that we don't
Kats.
have here in the state. And I love that. And I love that I can now order stuff from other continents, and like I can try the what's weird for me chip flavor that's very popular somewhere else.
Yeah.
It's fun.
But that's really funny. It's I was actually chatting with someone about um their sort of candies or sort of sweets, and obviously they're very different here. Um,
Yes.
but the influence as well. So the influence of the American their sort of films on on sort of us now. Um, the sort of Twinkies are something that we'd always heard about, but we had absolutely no idea what they were.
Yeah.
So unless you went on sort of holiday to, sort of Florida or somewhere like that, you didn't know what they were. And only in the last sort of, I don't know, 10 years or so, they've actually, brought them over so you can buy them now. But
Hmm.
for years it was like they're sort of Twinkies. I've no idea what that is. So unless you actually saw someone, eating one, not got a clue.
Yeah. Well, I love, Edgar Wright's films. And when like Shaun of the Dead came out, or and he goes to the corner store to get a cornetto. I don't know what a cornetto is. Like I've never even heard of this. And then they started calling it the Cornetto trilogy. And I was like, how do I have to Google cornetto because I don't know
Yeah,
what this thing is. But
yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
same.
I think we've veered off topic a little bit, but
Oh yeah, I
it
tend
does.
to do that. My apologies. Especially with
Well,
food involved.
but actually, it does. It shows up. I think just those minor points for me just shows like the work in this film. You can be blown away by
Yeah.
so many big bits, so many powerful scenes or sort of dialogue that or sort of some of the great sort of scares everybody. If you like a horror film, you like to be scared by it, and you absolutely are. Or it's a film that's that's got you thinking, days and days afterwards. But, you can also look at a tiny little bit and think, whoa, that's, so well done. And that sort of detail really does really sort of add up, to such a great film. And I must admit, I kind of wish I'd gotten round to it sooner. It's been great, talking about it. I really should have done. There's quite a few others there as I go on with this their sort of series now that I think folk are going to be shocked by what I haven't watched. But I really am so glad there to get round there to it. I am just going to round up there, Dirk. But what I would like you to do is tell me about your thing.
Oh, sure. Yeah, so VHUS is it's a podcast where each episode is about a film and the guest has the profession portrayed in the film. So we're having a different conversation about movies. It's not about whether it's good or bad. I pick a film and that becomes sort of the blueprint for the conversation where I interview the person about their personal life. And it's not about if it's accurate to the film. It's just a sort of a jump off point, if you will, but we get to cover a variety of topics. And a variety of professions. So some of the examples I've had is I did the movie Teen Witch with a witch. I did The Lure, which is a Polish murderous mermaid musical, and I did that with someone who's they're a professional mermaid. I've had some more classical jobs, like I had a birding coach. We did the movie Unborn. I've had musicians on. I had Chris Connolly from Ministry, and we talked about a horror musical called Suck. Which is great. It's about vampires. I highly recommend it. Yeah, so it's super fun. We're going into our 8th season right now. So seasons are 8 episodes each. There's a variety of things to check out. So I highly recommend people do it. You can find us on Instagram, Twitter at VHUS_podcast. And the website's vh-us.com. We got original artwork and some stuff on there as well. Anywhere you find your podcast, like this fine podcast.
Well, thank you very much, Dirk. It's been absolutely brilliant having you, and I hope you've had a good time. I think we have, haven't we? So
no, it was a real treat. I don't often get to talk about films that are like this well known and still find all these odd corners and gems and facts. I think that's really wonderful. I did want to end just with one last thing, and it's what Roger Ebert wrote. He wrote that it isn't a ghost story because the ghosts may not be present in any sense at all, except for as visions experienced by Jack and Danny. And I've seen this movie multiple times over the 43 years of my life. And I never realized that they're not really interacting with the ghosts. Like they're visions. It's very much things that they see rather than are affected by. Whereas now in most ghost stories, we have so much of just, it's very much the other thing. So, in movies like The Conjuring and whatnot. So I think that's another aspect that is just like what makes The Shining Kubrick's Shining,
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. And an excellent note there to end on. So thank you, Dirk. And thanks everyone for their listening. Thank you.
Thank you.